Career Month program. My name is Adam Sylvain, and I work with the Alumni Career Programs team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Digital Marketing for the Future. Today, we will hear from alumna Anka Twum-Baah, who currently serves as Senior Director of Microsoft 365 Enterprise Marketing and brings more than 20 years of experience in business-to-business and business-to-consumer marketing to today's presentation. She is a graduate of both the college and the Booth School of Business, where she was a Rath Foundation Merit Scholar and completed a joint program in economics and international business with the London School of Economics. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to Anka.
Thanks so much, Adam, and it's a pleasure to connect with all of you. Digital marketing is an area that I'm super passionate about. So over the next hour or so, what I'm going to do is go over 3 buckets of information. One, I'd love to share some trends and things that we're seeing within sort of the digital transformation place. This is for B2B and B2C. Second, I am going to talk a bit about how AI/machine learning is starting to shape how we think about reaching our consumer, whether that consumer is an individual end user or whether that consumer is enterprise. So it's been remarkable what the power of AI can do. And then in the last about 10, 15 minutes or so of my presentation, I do want to talk a bit about how, as marketers can prepare and what are sort of tips and tricks that we can use to effectively leverage technology such as AI and machine learning in the marketplace so that we can effectively reach our consumer in the most efficient way, and how you can think about building a robust end-to-end digital marketing program that not only prepares your organization or your business, whether it's a huge enterprise or small business currently, and how it can also build a foundation for the future. So as Adam said, I'm a double alum of the University of Chicago. I graduated from the college in 2001 in political science and returned back for more and graduated in 2008 from the Booth School of Business. So like I said, it's a pleasure to connect with all of you on this. And by all means, after the webinar, if you have additional questions or want to reach out, definitely feel free. I'm on LinkedIn. Some of you that are on the call right now have reached out to me with some really amazing questions. So I'll try to make a point to answer them during this podcast. So without further ado, let's dig in. So 15 years ago or so, when we thought about sort of, the infrastructure and the technology to really support us from a digital marketing perspective, it kind of looked like this. So for those of you who've been working for quite some time, you probably remember stacks and stacks of computers that held your data. It probably held your marketing campaigns. You were probably always worried about whether you were losing a campaign or a copy. I know at least when I started out as a manager, I lost quite a bit of, marketing copy in my day because it was saved on some drive. So this is kind of what the world looked like about 15 years ago. Now, fast forward to today. And what we've seen is that the reality is, with AI technology, with cloud computing, with big data, we've been able to store information, we've been able to leverage information, and we've been able to find way more effective ways to reach our consumer, which is remarkable. And this was, sort of from a sort of podcast that I gave at the end of last year, but I think even coming into 2019, it still rings true. What you have on the left is, servers that most of the companies that we work for had at one point in time. What you have on the right is a cloud-based server that's actually stored about 500 meters below sea level. So that's just to show you with, technology, with digital transformation, with AI computing, the world is at our fingertips. The data that we have is at our fingertips. The way we're able to reach our consumer, whether it's an enterprise or an end user, is at our fingertips. And so what that means is for all of us who are marketers or for us that work with marketing teams, we need to be more thoughtful and more savvy about how we think about digital marketing, how we think about going mobile first for the future. The world has changed. When we think about sort of digital transformation, it was a lot of sort of silo working. It was a lot of storing of information. There was a lot of hierarchy in terms of how we thought about the consumer. I remember when I first became, a marketer about 20 some odd years ago. I remember the days of, coming up with a campaign, either working with an agency or working in-house, doing 6 to 8 months of research, for a consumer. And in some instances, I still do that level of research. But then, putting that out into the market, whatever it's a campaign or sort of positioning our value proposition, or even in the old school days, leaving behind a play card or a deck or, a sort of folio. And then waiting for a bunch of months to see if our customer reacted. Did they like it? Did they not like it? Did our, competitors think of something smarter than we did? But the reality is, the world has changed. And with digital transformation, the world kind of looks more like this, right? So there's this interconnectedness in terms of how we reach our consumers, large and small. There's a way that we're able to leverage our network. There's a way that we're able to leverage information and get real-time feedback about how our consumer is reacting to what we put out there. And I think from that perspective, it creates a really sort of dynamic situation when we think about marketing overall. But I would say the lion's share of that now, at least now for the future, has become digital marketing. And part of that relies on the digital transformation that we've been seeing so far. Now, in terms of the pace of innovation, these are just some sort of really sort of quick stats that I thought was super duper compelling. By the year 2020, which is frankly next year, we're going to see that IoT, so the Internet of Things devices, represents 2 times PC, smartphones, and tablets. So that means going to your grocery store and using technology. A lot of it is AI-backed technology for that store, whether let's say it's a Target or is a Sainsbury or it's a Mark and Spencer if you're outside of the US. And having that information that the supermarket knows about you and being connected through the internet to a warehouse that understands how you move and how you shop as a consumer will start to eclipse what we have in PC sales. What that means is, the idea of leveraging AI, big data, or just even the latest technology is not just reserved for, big tech companies like Microsoft, which is where I work. I think the reality is, regardless of industry, we're starting to see that the idea of having that level of connectivity as a means to communicate to our consumers, as a means to get real-time information, and even influence them to behave in ways that we would want to, is starting to eclipse the idea of just having a PC. What we've also seen is that, the world's data is getting to 44 zettabytes by the year 2020. I remember when I just graduated from business school, when we talked about, data, we were talking about them in sort of terabytes, right? So, the idea of having terabytes of data that you can transform into insights was a huge deal. The reality is terabytes is probably, what, your individual sort of computer is able to store on a regular basis, depending on the type of device that you have. The reality is that we're getting to zettabytes, and it's showing the exponential growth of half-life, meaning, we're anticipating zettabytes by 2020, which is next year, but the reality is, we're already on pace to eclipse that. And there's been some really interesting information that's been coming out over the last couple months on that. In terms of business value, we are estimating by 2021 that AI will generate new business value of about $2.9 trillion. And because of this AI, the idea of AI augmenting human ingenuity, we're recovering about 6.2 billion hours of worker productivity, which is fantastic. I think from an organizational perspective, it's a great way to have technology augment human ingenuity and not replace it. I think what it also means that the consumers, whether it's, sort of your workplace, so you think about employees, or whether that consumer is that end user, they're going to be looking for ways not only for them to sort of consume content and consume product, but they're increasingly looking for ways for whatever sort of solution or product that you're selling to make their lives overall just easier. And then last but not least is the mixed reality opportunity. So accelerating mixed reality, whether it's hardware, we have estimated at 110 billion, or whether it's software at 72 billion, is really sort of the market opportunity here. And I think why this stat is really interesting from a digital marketing perspective is looking at more marketing in terms of not so much what you're telling the customer to do, but more of a shift in terms of digital marketing and just marketing overall around experiences. I know at Microsoft we spend quite a bit of time thinking about, how do you think about experiences that will razzle and dazzle your consumer? How do you think about experiences that will not tell them what your product or service is, but will show them or whet their beak or give them a taste about what you're about to offer them? Certainly mixed reality is an opportunity to do that. And HoloLens is another that a lot of companies have used. But I think there are even more sort of low-hanging fruit ways. So prior to being at Microsoft, I was at Amazon, where we thought really carefully about what the user experience is, what the user journey is. And no, we didn't necessarily use HoloLens or mixed reality, but the idea of giving content in a multi-dimensional way. So for example, if I'm buying a widget on Amazon.com, like how do I look at that product? How do I feature that product? So it's not necessarily a static image, but you create content, whether that's written content or copy or imagery that can showcase, what exactly that product and service is. Before Amazon, I was at Marriott, and when you're thinking about a hotel, it's all about the experience. And again, while we didn't necessarily use mixed reality or HoloLens or some of that cutting edge technology, we did think, very carefully about when an individual walks into our hotel space, how are they experiencing, that product or that service? So what we're starting to see, along with the pace of innovation moving really quickly, is the idea of, 20, 30 years ago, you would tell the customer what the value proposition was, and you would tell them what they're going to buy or what they should expect to receive with a product or solution. Whereas now is more about inspiring them, getting them to experience it, helping them understand how this product or service is a key sort of asset of their overall life, whether that's in their, sort of workplace as an employee or as an end user. So why now? So, there's been a bunch of buzz about sort of AI. I think about 15, 20 years ago, or maybe even about 12 years ago, the big buzz around marketing was big data. I remember, going to American Express after business school, and you couldn't get by 48 hours without big data coming up in a meeting room, or you couldn't sort of get by looking on the web without big data coming up. And I think, the idea around big data was about how you can mine information, get insight, so you can market in a more efficient way. I think a lot of that has moved to the web, and I think this is where digital marketing becomes super important. I think the future of digital marketing is definitely around AI, and I would even go as far as saying machine learning. And the reality is, because there's data to back it up. So we estimate about 40 billion of additional revenue shift driven by AI. So driven by technology. So, AI being defined as, technology that can, harness boatloads, massive zettabytes of information, of data, whether that's data on an individual, data on a company, and leverage that data to start doing a number of things. One, do predictive analysis, so you can have more insight into how you think your consumer is going to behave in the future. Big data, sort of powered by AI to think about, more of how do you think their behavior will change over time, which will allow your company to sort of be more sort of aggressive in terms of how they want to fashion their digital marketing strategy. And then three, leveraging big data to use cloud-based solutions so that whether you're within a marketing team or outside of a marketing team, you can sort of create cross collaboration and effectively go after your consumer in a smart way. From an enterprise perspective, we anticipate 85% of our enterprises will be using AI by 2020, which means, most of us will be working at companies where there is access on some very basic level to more sort of complex levels around AI, big data, and sort of AI-backed technology to not only help employees do their jobs better, but effectively reach consumers in a smart way. Now, in terms of AI transformation, it's really around these three areas, right? So it's around these sort of digital agents. So you can transform your engagement with your customers and your employees so that you're getting touch points with your customers and you're working with employees in a really sort of, well, for employees, a really collaborative way, but with your customers in a really kind of meaningful way. I mean, how many of us have received, let's say, an email, sort of banner ad or an email promotion, and it looks pretty darn obvious that what they basically did was put dear and then slipped in your name from some database, giving you basically, a sort of, sort of email, sort of marketing information that looks pretty much like what everyone else in their database is going to receive. The idea is that with AI, you are creating an ecosystem, or you're creating a situation where your engagements from a digital marketing perspective are a lot more compelling beyond the fact that you were able to slot my first name at the beginning of an email notification. And I think AI will allow, and is already allowing us to do this in a compelling way. That's easy because the reality is the power of AI is able to leverage all of the data and the content that we have and manipulate it in a way that makes sense far more efficiently, frankly, far more accurately than we can do previously, let's say 15, 20 years ago. The second is around intelligent apps. So the idea of leveraging AI to create future business applications. So if you're a small business, and we see this a lot with the small businesses that we work with, certainly at Microsoft, we've definitely used it, and Amazon, and even when I was at American Express, where it was very sort of nascent usage of some of this AI technology about 8 years ago, the idea that you can leverage AI to create, whether it's business applications or create sort of mini sort of ecosystems or landing pages so that you can effectively reach out to your consumer. Back in the day, if I wanted to create an app, let's say for an event, whether it was a consumer event or an enterprise event, I had to get an agency. We had to spend tons of time, figuring out an app, and then it was a bit of a production of launching an app. Whether you work for an agency or whether you work in-house, the reality is AI can allow you to create almost like these mini ecosystems that are digitally based, and I know a lot of companies are going mobile first, that will allow you to reach your consumer better. And then last but not least, which I think is almost the most exciting part, I know it may not be the most sexy sort of part of AI, but the idea that AI can streamline a lot of business processes. With all of the companies that I've worked for, the idea of leveraging AI so that we can use, let's say, analytics to decide how we want to segment a population, how we want to create personas for digital marketing so that we can get a lot more sophisticated. The fantastic thing about that is AI allows a lot of those sort of back-end work in preparation to launching, let's say, a digital marketing campaign. It allows the process to be smoother. It allows more interconnectiveness and collaboration, not only with in-house stakeholders or internal stakeholders, but let's say external parties that you would be working with. So overall, the AI transformation is broad, and I would say to sort of round this out, not only does the leveraging of AI and strong sort of technology allow you to reach your consumer faster in a more engaged and compelling way, it also allows you internally, regardless of the size of the organization that you work for, or whether you work for a corporation or more agency side, it allows you, I think, as a marketer to be a lot more thoughtful, be a lot more efficient with how you use your marketing dollars and how you effectively think about a digital marketing plan. So that's sort of a bit of a taste around like what we all, I think, as senior marketing leaders have been seeing in terms of digital transformation, AI, which also bleeds into machine learning and how that impacts digital marketing. I'm going to transition now more into, some of the challenges I think, marketers are facing, as well as, maybe giving you the tools and tips and tricks that I can arm all of you that are either listening to this podcast right now, real time, or will listen to the recording, so that you can effectively think about digital marketing sort of end to end and the future of what digital marketing means, as well as how do you as a marketer in general think about being mobile first, think about creating that foundation so that you can be successful in reaching your consumer and selling the product or solution that you're tasked with selling. So overall, I think that there's some inherent challenges just given the pace of innovation. One is always, finding a cost-effective way of reaching your audience. I think as marketers, we kind of struggle with, I don't have this unlimited well of funding to reach my consumer. Usually resources are limited, but even if you had tons of money, there's a level of cost efficiency in terms of reaching your consumer, whether that's B2B or B2C. And I think even 50 years from now, like this will be a challenge that as marketers, we're going to have to be effective at. And to me, what I've always said, before Marriott, I actually worked at a startup. And for me, it was like the real test of a true marketer. Like, can you market anything, with, let's say, an $80 million budget? Or if your budget was, a couple of $100,000, or if you're a small business, your marketing budget may be just thousands of dollars. And how do you make sort of thoughtful decisions and trade-offs about, meeting your customer where they're at? I think that what's great about sort of AI and digital marketing and where it's going right now is that, there are more tools that you can put in your toolkit to effectively reach your audience. So we'll talk a bit about that more when we get into the more sort of practicum part of my presentation. The second is getting buyers to engage with you and your solutions. And so whether that's a solution in terms of, hey, I have, a great way for you to shop for shoes, or I have a pair of shoes that I want to sell you, or if I have, let's say, a B2B offering that I'm trying to sell you. I think at the end of the day, as marketers, we're always looking for interesting ways to engage with buyers, whoever those buyers are. And I think the great thing about where we are from a digital marketing perspective is there's a lot of real-time things that you can do to engage with your customers. The not so great thing about digital marketing is everyone knows that there's real time. So sometimes you need to kind of fight for that mind share. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Next is managing large, long, and complex sales to completion. So there was a stat that Forrester came out with that says, whether it's B2B or B2C, an average customer needs to look at content 9 times before they decide whether they're going to buy or not. So think about it. If you're selling t-shirts, or if you're selling a pair of shoes, or if you're selling a CRM solution, that customer is going to want to review content 9 times before they finally get to a point where they say, okay, well, I'm going to make that purchase. Well, that means, there are opportunities, I think, with digital marketing and AI and machine learning to potentially close the selling cycle. And 2, making sure that once you've sort of spent the sweat equity to getting that customer to buy, they become a customer for life. Next is winning and competing on value and not price. Like, I think, regardless of where you are in the sort of cycle and sort of the customer journey cycle, you want to make sure that you're explaining and articulating and educating and frankly re-educating the idea of the value proposition of your product. So, we'll talk about how you can kind of position yourself in the marketplace so that you're not sort of doing a bit of a price war, but you're really creating what a lot of senior marketers, execs such as myself say, creating, raving fans of whatever product or service that you're selling. And that gets into the last one, right? The thrilling and the profiting from customers. When you think about the lifetime value of acquisition, the idea is, you want to sort of put in that acquisition and acquire that customer. But, over time, you want that customer to sort of have, a strong ROI. And this is also a nice sort of bookend. So this last section is a nice bookend from finding cost-effective, ways to reach your audience, right? Because if you're able to find cost-effective ways of reaching your audience, and if your customer is willing to stay with you and then really believe in you and become a fan and purchase more, you're really sort of driving that, lifetime value. You're really driving that ROI, which gets to your bottom line. So these are inherent challenges. Like, even with great technology, even technology 30, 40 years from now, my sense is these will always be challenges. But I think the great thing is with, strong technology and in really embracing that as a digital marketer, you can sort of change these challenges to sort of opportunities to be an effective digital marketer in this marketplace. Now, with some of these, I wanted to kind of do a bit of a deep dive, right? So in terms of cost effectively reaching your audience, this was one I wanted to address, just given some of the feedback that I received, in preparation for this podcast. Like I said, some of you were great in kind of reaching out and giving me your feedback and asking questions ahead of time. I would say what I found to be sort of effective from a marketing perspective is, don't feel the need to over-engineer, right? Like I think don't feel the need to do sort of quantity over quality. And this is definitely something that I tell my team all the time. I think in terms of cost effectively reaching your audience, sometimes it's good. I think there's an Abraham Lincoln quote where, if I have to chop down a tree, I spend, the bulk of my time sort of sharpening my axe. And I think from a marketer, that's really sage advice, where you want to be thoughtful about the channels that you use. You want to be thoughtful with the content that you leverage to reach out to your customer, so that when you do spend the money to actually sort of press go in whatever campaign or however you're reaching your audience, you feel like that you've put your resources in the right place, and you feel like you're hitting the bullseye. As an early marketer, the worst thing is to sort of ask for money for this massive, consumer outreach, whether it's a campaign, whether it's an activation, and then to get the numbers back to see that, most of the customers didn't engage. Like, that's a complete waste of resources and money and time. So I would say, don't sort of spray and pray, don't reach. Be thoughtful about how you want to kind of use your dollars. And some of that may mean doing a bit of research and thinking ahead of time. Get over yourself. This is one that I always sort of say to definitely folks on my teams. I've led a bunch of teams around this all the time. But get buyers to engage, right? And make the product and the content that you're developing about the product less about your company and sort of glorifying your company and more about how can this product or solution help the need. So I always say, make your consumer the hero, make your client the hero. And to me, that gets to the heart of what storytelling is. I would say, digital marketing a lot is being an effective storyteller, and the digital piece is just the platform that you use to tell your story. And when you're telling your story, even if you're selling, a bottle of wine or a pen or a book, the idea is, consumers will want to engage more with you if they are inspired and believe in that story and the value proposition resonates, and if this feels like, or whatever you're selling feels like a solution to a need. So I say sort of get over yourself, because I think the knee-jerk reaction is to almost wax philosophical about how wonderful the company is. And not to say that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I always urge, especially just purely from a marketing perspective, and even more so when you're looking at digital channels, is to make your consumer or make your client the hero in all of this. So to do that, that means you kind of need to get over yourself. Next is, master your trade, right? So a lot of times, when we think about our product or service that we're trying to sell, we're kind of speaking to ourselves internally, right? Like we all sort of kind of believe our lore and have, dipped into the Kool-Aid of, hey, I think my product is the best. And that may be great internally. I mean, that might also even be the case externally. But, you need to know unequivocally what you do better, or what product you're selling better than everyone else. And for you to really know that and really understand that, embrace that, that means you have to master your trade. I think sometimes people perceive marketing to be a lot more of sort of the glitz and the fanfare. But I think, most marketers will realize that there's quite a bit of planning and analysis that goes on behind the scenes before you even think about, positioning your product. And so from that perspective, you have to master your trade. You need to know the ins and outs of your product, your service unequivocally, and you need to understand sort of your corner of the block and what you get, right better than everyone else. So from that perspective, once you're willing to understand the value truly, and once you're also able to communicate and showcase your value, then you don't feel the stress of competing on price, right? The value kind of speaks for itself. And like I said, to do that effectively, you kind of need to master your trade. Now, I want to kind of transition to some, practical tips, and also want to leave some time for questions. In terms of, understanding your audience, this is where I talked about a little bit earlier, really getting to understand, doing the planning, understanding the consumer and the, competitors that are out there. And what I do, and this is just, an exercise that I always kind of walk through with my teams, and I've kind of developed this over the years, is, there's certainly buyer research, there's market research, there's content strategy, communication strategy, and measurement strategy. I'm a huge proponent of interviewing customers. I love voice of the customer, and not to say that, research doesn't matter, because it definitely does. Just even in the sort of 7-8 months that I've been at Microsoft, we conducted, pretty extensive research on how people see our Microsoft 365 enterprise solution. When I was at Marriott, we did a 3-month study to understand how customers, mostly, sort of end users, how did they perceive our loyalty program, Marriott Rewards, which I'm sure many of you use. And, it was a precursor to work that was done for SPG. And so I always say, there's tons of research. You can buy research, you can conduct your own research, but never skim, even if it's, a dozen or so people, getting that voice of the customer, and interviewing stakeholders, and, bouncing the sort of what you hear from the customer with the research that you're receiving, because there's always kind of nuances that come out from talking to a customer that may not be as apparent with research. So once you've done the customer sort of interviews and internal interviews and research, one thing that I'm a huge proponent of is understanding your persona. So I've worked in the loyalty space for quite some time. So we have all these personas around loyalty, around travel as a treat. So people who use their points to reward themselves or reward their families, or folks who, as soon as they get, a couple of points, they want to burn them right away. Within Microsoft 365 Enterprise, we look at, those who are, let's say, a little bit more reluctant to, upgrade to a large enterprise solution, with those who embrace innovation and want the latest and greatest, technology at their fingertips for their organization. I think having these buyer personas allows for several things. One, it helps with segmentation, which is huge. And with segmentation, you can kind of see how the customer journey unfolds. Two, it actually is a great way for the marketing side and the sales side to collaborate, because with these personas, you can develop, content that can help your sales team do more consultative selling and sell effectively. And I think three, what I love about personas is when you do personas over time, especially over the same product and solution, it gives you an edge in terms of how the consumer behavior is changing over time. So it was interesting with some of the products that we have on the Microsoft side to see, 5 years ago what like a CIO or a chief marketing officer thought was super important, and look at those personas and look at those pain points and how they behave, to fast forward to now about 5 or 6 years later, and to see how some of these personas have evolved. So I think the persona piece and even the buyer journey piece is I'm spending a lot of time in trying to emphasize that, because to be honest, that's the piece that always gets forgotten, or is like, oh, it's too much work, so we skip it. And once you're able to do that, you're able to develop a content map, which will be effective in terms of how you want to do marketing in the digital space. Next is create a plan. And so for most marketers, this should be pretty straightforward. But you want to do an audit of your content, you want to develop it, and you want to curate it. And then you want to think about a promotion plan, right? And whether that's an editorial calendar, if you have the budget, whether you want to go into a media plan. If for digital marketing especially, you want to strike that balance between organic sort of hits. So I'm not worrying so much about sort of paying to get customers, versus when is the inflection point where, you want to use some paid dollars to really drive traffic. How do you syndicate your content? So what does it mean sort of for above the line and below the line marketing motions? And what does it mean to sort of, let's say, leverage, your website or a blog if your company has it, or maybe if you want to sort of go a little bit more, grassroots. And then email, I think email is starting to slowly kind of sunset as the predominant mode of digital marketing, but you'd be surprised, how many people still pay attention to the emails that come through from a particular, company or service. But I would say using AI and using machine learning, there's an opportunity to really customize, the email so that it's relevant, and you're sending it to segmented populations, and it's curated so that you get the highest engagement. In terms of marketing analytics, you do get what you measure. So one thing that I'm super maniacal with my team is just really making sure that you measure, for efficacy's sake, right? So this is, a pretty straightforward kind of, sort of funnel, just a consumer funnel. But you want to kind of think about how much money you're putting in to create like lead generation, bringing that in, right? So that's super, super important. You want to make sure that you're getting into the sort of maximum quality leads, right? You want to make sure that you're really thinking about how they're being converted. And then you really also want to kind of make sure that you're, bringing and closing the cycle and bringing your customer around. Just as a bit of a think around, how I think about analytics and how I think about measuring. Here are just, I'll throw it out there, a handful of things that I measure on every single digital kind of marketing campaign, anything that I do. I always think about, ROI. I always think about customer acquisition, and, customer acquisition per channel. So for example, when I was at American Express, we had a lot of channels, as options. The great thing there is a lot of our own channels were quite strong, but there were also opportunities to, leverage the channels, that were external. And for me, I had a very clear sense early on that, certain channels can do different things. All channels aren't built the same. So while, sending a email blast or leveraging our sort of customer support network were sometimes more expensive channels. So if you think about the Platinum card, so when I did membership rewards for Platinum card, I mean, having, someone as part of a call center pick up the phone and call a Platinum card member is extremely expensive. However, the high touch and the engagement was huge. Right. And, one call could lead to, 20 to 30%, uptick in charge volume on a card. And what we would also see is not only would they spend more on one card, it would encourage them to spend more on maybe other Amex cards, whether it was a corporate card or a consumer card that they had. So while, having someone from a call center, call and let's say brief, let's say a Platinum card member on a particular, benefit, and sort of update them on a campaign they're running, because yes, we saw an email, we sent an email, but we don't know if they actually saw it. What we were able to see is, in terms of the ROI, was super huge. So that's just one quick example of sort of the analytics. In addition to ROI, as well as cost of acquisition, I always look at attrition. Attrition is huge. I mean, the most attrition that you generally see when you look at a customer journey, if you're really going to get them, is within the first sort of 90 to 100 days, 180 days rather. So, depending on your acquisition or campaign, you have roughly 90 to 180 days of a bit of mind share. And then after that, to be honest, they start to drop off, or they forget, or then you have to pour in more money to acquire them and bring them through the funnel again. So attrition and how they had tried and so on are things that I look at, in addition to from a digital marketing perspective, sort of looking at how many hits, looking at sort of drop-off rates, looking at how much time they spend on your site, and so on and so forth. But those are just a couple of sort of measures that I look at from an analytics perspective. But I think especially if you're doing digital marketing, the great thing is, a lot of digital marketing has reports and queries that are behind it, which makes it, great for you to access this data and course correct any sort of digital marketing motions that you have. In terms of marketing strategy, and I'll go through this quickly because I do want to save some time for questions, is, you want to be able to build a foundation for growth. And that means creating a framework, doing the research, developing, and then publishing. So we talked a bit about that, but this is just a quick framework that I use when I think about marketing, for sure. I think is even more important for digital marketing. And so, once you kind of think through that, and once you're able to, figure out what you want your framework to be, how you want to position, do value proposition in the pillars, what research you have, and we talked a bit about that, curating and developing the content, as well as publishing it, regardless of, sort of the digital frame. And then always evaluating if your sort of decisions make sense. That allows you to be sort of effective what you do. And like I said, overall as a marketer, but also within the digital space. And the good thing is there's enough in terms of AI and machine learning that can support this, and that will allow you to do it in a pretty user-friendly way. So with that said, thank you for the time. I think that this is a space that I really, really love and I'm passionate about. And also I've spent a lot of years doing it in the US. I've also done it outside of the US. So I moved back to the US about a year and a half ago and spent 4 years in Hong Kong and Singapore. And then before that, I was in London. So I've seen a lot of different examples of effective digital marketing. And frankly, it's with AI and machine learning and technology, it has been able to refine some of my approaches. So a lot of the approaches that I'm using now as a digital marketer is what I've shared with you. So with that said, happy to answer any questions on this call, because I think we have roughly 10 minutes left. And then by all means, if you have more questions or thoughts, like I said, I'm on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me, and feel free to shoot me any other questions or thoughts that you have.
Great, thank you so much, Anka. I'm happy to moderate the bit of time that we have for Q&A. So the first question we have: how do you think about digital marketing and having more and more data about people in the context of privacy and ethical issues such as GDPR, Facebook data sharing, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's also a question that I think about all the time. We at Microsoft, leading sort of out of my team, we're partnering with the New York Times to talk about AI and ethics. And we're sponsoring an event in February in California that talks very much about that. I think that with, the usage of personal data or PII data, personally identifiable data, it's important to make sure that the engines that you're using to leverage this data, to be thoughtful about your marketing, are secure solutions, right? That it has the necessary sort of compliance per your company, per your market, and that you're thoughtful about leveraging the data to help support effectively engaging with customers, and that the information is protected. So, with GDPR, that's a motion from the European Union. However, there are versions of that are starting to pop up, everywhere around the world. When I was at Marriott and we were working with data, there were a whole bunch of things that we needed to do from a privacy perspective to make sure that how we stored the data was super compliant, making sure that where we store the data was compliant and that this information was secure and encrypted. And I think, making sure that the solutions that you're using with that, along with making sure that the agencies that you use, because many marketers use agencies, making sure that the agencies that you use also follow suit will be key.
Great, thank you. Our next question is a request for a definition. So we've seen the term AI used in a lot of different contexts. Could you provide just a short definition of AI, since it has become shorthand reference for many things?
Yeah, so there's many points of view on AI. It's really around technology that allows you to use massive amounts of data and information, and whether it's on your personal preferences, whether it's on behavior, whether it's just effective computing, and through this technology, you're able to build solutions, you're able to build products that can supplement work that humans do. Right. So, I could sit at my computer and create a mega Excel sheet to think about how many times, a person comes into a Microsoft store, or I can leverage technology to, look at vast amounts of information. Some of it is predictive, some of it is automative, and with that, then use this information or use the technology backed sort of content to drive a particular outcome. So that's how I think about sort of AI or sort of artificial intelligence, is the idea of you have a machine, sort of doing what it would probably take a human tons of time and mental use and capability to do. And if used effectively and if used thoughtfully and ethically, AI, from my perspective, is not meant to sort of replace humans, but is meant to supplement human ingenuity and get us to be, more sort of productive and do our jobs better and connect with each other in an effective way.
Great, thank you. Next question. One attendee works at an energy company where most of their work and contracts are relationship-based. Their utility and corporate customers that they work with, these relationships haven't historically come from digital marketing. It's been through relationships, but digital presence is still important to them. Do you have any ideas on how the topics you covered today might be relevant to their work specifically?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part. Can you?
Sure. Yeah. So an energy company where most of their work and contracts are relationship based, and the relationships they've gotten historically have not come from digital marketing, but a digital presence is still something that's very important to them. Do you have any ideas on how some of the topics or the digital marketing could be relevant to them?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I actually love this question because part of my remit currently is thinking through some of regulated industries and how they could start adopting more cloud-based solutions. So I get this question all the time around certainly oil and energy, but I also get it for like insurance and financial services because they're heavily regulated. So I would say a couple of things. Yes, for oil and energy, it is a lot of relationship-based ways of attracting customers or making partners or so on. But I think where AI becomes really compelling for like oil and energy is around how, let's say, first line workers or some of the sort of in the drill bit workers or the individuals that are on the front line, whether it's, let's say, sort of a drilling site or so on, how they can use that technology to effectively do their job better so that you can, if it's something as simplistic as extracting oil, whether you can do that in a more effective way. I don't know who asked that question, but during one of our first tier events, in September, Satya, who's CEO of Microsoft and also is a Chicago Booth alum, highlighted a couple of industries that are very similar to oil, so pharmaceuticals, so on and so forth, where a lot of that, they're heavily regulated, but a lot of the work is done, from a relationship standpoint. But I think that there are opportunities to use AI from streamlining internal sort of processes and organizations. So if you remember the slide that I had, towards the beginning, it was like, okay, well, how do you use AI? And I said, 3 ways, sort of engaging your customer, thinking about how you go to market. And the third piece was streamlining processes. I think for industries like oil, the streamlining processes and then also communicating to key stakeholders that might be external. So great, you made that relationship, through you met that customer through, let's say, a sales motion that was relationship based. But how do you continue to communicate them, to even update them on the latest innovation that you may have at your oil company? You can do that through AI technology in a really sort of interesting and provocative way. So that's how I would answer that question. And whoever asked, if you want to kind of hit me up on LinkedIn, there's a couple of cool examples that we've, posted online. Some of them are oil industry or very, very similar, like highly regulated, relationship based. And I can share how at least Microsoft has thought about doing that using AI.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one last question. And we had one attendee ask if you could explain what an earned channel is.
Yeah, so an earned channel. So let me take a step back. There's paid channel, earned channel, right? So let me just go through paid channel, because if I talk about paid channel, then earned channel will be a lot more, I think, easy to understand. So, when you think of sort of a paid channel, right, that's essentially, along the lines of, look, I'm partnering, with the New York Times. We're co-developing some content. We've paid for access on their site to show banner ads and so on and so forth. So we are paying, this sort of New York Times, which is a media, publication, to do sort of marketing on our behalf. When you think about sort of, or more of a sort of earned channel, so those are promotional sort of efforts that aren't necessarily paid for. Right. So when I think about earned channels, that often means either we leverage, our existing channels. So at Microsoft 365, we have a Microsoft 365 site, for both consumer and enterprise. I look after the enterprise one. I have a colleague that looks after the consumer piece. Where there are products and services that cross both, I reach out to that team and say, hey, I'm certainly not going to, pay for this, but I want to be able to kind of leverage your branding to kind of create a halo effect. So, to answer your question, like really quickly, like paid channels, you're usually paying, an external kind of media agency to showcase your content or to sell your, good services on your behalf and that's paid. When you're earned, you're really thinking about sort of things that you're not necessarily paying a media, or advertising agency. So you're getting that publicity through your either internal channel or an own channel that you have, where you're leveraging sort of your own internal branding, which is great. And I'm a huge proponent of doing both.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to everyone for participating, and a special thank you to Anka for sharing all of your insights into the world of digital marketing and kind of where things are and where they're going. I invite everyone to join us again next week as we present a webinar, Strategic Strategies to Relaunch Your Career, and that'll be Wednesday, January 16th at 12 p.m. Please visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for the most up-to-date schedule of events. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you.